Pécrot, a quaint village nestled in the heart of Belgium, boasts a population of just 732. Situated within the municipality of Grès-d'Oisseau, this serene locale is marked by its modest yet vital train stop on Line 139. This 29-kilometer stretch of double-tracked, electrified railway connects the bustling cities of Leuven and Otignies. Despite its scenic tranquility, Pécrot's rail line is a crucial artery for commerce, primarily accommodating international freight services. It also serves national and a few regional passenger services, with trains whizzing through at speeds reaching up to 90 kilometers per hour. The railway, a lifeline managed by Infrabel, a Belgian government-owned entity, is predominantly operated by the Belgian National Railway, reflecting the country's robust commitment to efficient and reliable transportation. On the fateful day, an empty passenger train made its northbound journey from Wavre to Leuven. Designated as AMMS 74 number 709, this train was a later model of the classic twin EMU, a two-car electric multiple unit originally introduced in 1939. The designation 74 in its name refers to the year this particular model was constructed. Measuring 152 feet in length and weighing in at 107 metric tons, the AMMS 74 was designed to transport up to 178 passengers in a comfortable two-class configuration, reaching speeds of up to 140 kilometers per hour. In stark contrast, approaching from the opposite direction was a double-traction unit of the NMBS at SNCB Class 09, numbered 945. Each unit of this class stretches 173 feet long and tips the scales at 106 metric tons, capable of accommodating up to 198 passengers. These trains are particularly distinctive for their large windshields framed by a prominent protrusion, earning them the affectionate nickname duikbril, or diving goggles, cruising at speeds of up to 120 kilometers per hour. This configuration set the stage for what would become a pivotal moment on the tracks of Pécrot. On the morning of March 27, 2001, shortly after 8:40 a.m., a signal box worker at Wavre station observed an EMU setting off northbound. To his alarm, he noted the train was passing under a red signal, an immediate sign of danger on the tracks. Acting swiftly, he reached out at 8:42 a.m. to the signal box at Leuven station, some 24 kilometers up the line, aiming to alert them of the errant train hurtling toward their location. However, a critical barrier impeded this urgent communication. The signal box worker at Wavre spoke only French, while his counterpart at Leuven was a Dutch speaker. This language divide thwarted any effective warning, leaving the train's dangerous journey unchecked. Faced with this dire situation and guided by stringent safety protocols, the Wavre worker made a decisive move to cut power to the track. This action was governed by a clear guideline. A power outage lasting at least 20 seconds mandates that the train driver must initiate an emergency stop rather than risk coasting through the blackout, ensuring an immediate and forceful response to the impending crisis. Upon realizing the imminent danger, the signal box worker at Wavre swiftly contacted the Central Control Center in Brussels to request an emergency shutdown of the power supply to the overhead wire. Despite the urgency, the control center's initial response was to attempt communication with the driver of the unauthorized northbound train. However, attempts to reach the driver via radio were unsuccessful. At 8:46 a.m., similar attempts to radio the driver of a southbound train, which had just left Leuven bound for Wavre on the same track, also failed. Compounding the problem, neither driver carried a cell phone, rendering them unreachable as the onboard radio systems failed to connect. At 8:47 a.m., the worker at the Brussels Control Center finally shut down the power to the overhead wire. Despite these efforts, the intervention came too late. Both trains, now devoid of power, began to coast. It remains unclear whether the drivers managed to activate the emergency stops. Tragically, at 8:49 a.m., the two trains collided head-on near the town of Pécrot. The impact was catastrophic. The northbound train's force was such that it obliterated the leading car of the oncoming train, propelling it upwards and shearing off its own driver's cab. The wreckage came to a halt in a dramatic, steep angle atop the crushed forward end of the second car. This horrific collision resulted in the deaths of both drivers and 6 passengers aboard the southbound train. An additional 12 passengers sustained injuries in the harrowing event. The tragic outcome underscored the catastrophic consequences of communication failures and delayed responses in critical safety operations. The local residents, whose properties line the railway, were the first on the scene of the devastating train collision in Pécrot. They were quickly joined by professional emergency responders, who arrived in increasing numbers from nearby towns and distant regions as the magnitude of the disaster became evident. The wreckage was marked by the leading car of the AMS 74, which towered above the debris, visible from afar, eerily reminiscent of a scene from an explosion. Its destroyed state, however, was less severe compared to that of the leading car of the southbound train, which was so thoroughly demolished it almost seemed to disappear from existence. The only substantial remnant of this car was its peeled-back roof, now resting flat atop the second car, giving scant evidence of the car's former presence. From the outset, it was painfully clear that the drivers had had no chance of survival. The emergency teams had to meticulously cut through the twisted metal to reach and rescue the trapped passengers. Miraculously, the northbound train had been empty of passengers, and the Class 09s of the southbound train had been sparsely occupied, which tragically somewhat limited the extent of the catastrophe. Despite this, the collision marked Belgium's worst rail disaster in 25 years, a grim reminder of the potential dangers of rail travel and the critical importance of stringent safety protocols. Investigators swiftly focused their attention on the driver of the northbound train, who had tragically departed under a red signal. As a newcomer to the job, his inexperience was initially considered a significant factor. There was no indication that he had deliberately ignored the red signal. However, witness statements suggested that he might have stopped the train too far forward upon reaching the station, positioning his cab beyond the exit signal. Consequently, he was likely unable to see the signal's status and might have presumed it was green following an all clear from the dispatcher. Crucially, this all clear message, typically issued by dispatchers or conductors, does not authorize the train's departure. It merely indicates that the train may leave once the signal turns green and usually pertains to the completion of passenger boarding processes. Notably, the rail line lacked an automatic train control system that would automatically halt a train running a red signal. Without such a system, there was no fail-safe to stop the train once it began moving, assuming the driver did not realize his error, which, it appears, he did not. Regrettably, the driver's untimely death meant that his account of events could not be obtained, leaving some aspects of the investigation unavoidably unresolved. The catastrophic impact of the collision was exacerbated by a profound breakdown in communication, which significantly delayed critical responses, such as the deactivation of the overhead wires. The initial communication failure occurred when the signal box worker at Waver Station was unable to effectively communicate with his counterpart just a few kilometers up the line at Leuven Station. This issue was deeply rooted in Belgium's unique linguistic divide. Belgium is essentially divided into 2 major linguistic regions. The northern third of the country, known as Flanders or the Flemish community, primarily speaks Dutch. Conversely, the southern 2/3 constitute Wallonia, or the French community, where French is the predominant language. Additionally, there is a small German-speaking community in the east and a bilingual zone around Brussels, but these areas were not directly relevant to the events at Pécrot. This linguistic fragmentation meant that the Wavre worker, a French speaker, could not adequately warn the Dutch-speaking Leuven worker of the impending danger. This critical lapse in communication underscored the challenges posed by Belgium's linguistic landscape, particularly in emergency situations where rapid and clear communication is essential. Line 139, which tragically became the site of the Pécrot Train Collision, is emblematically positioned between Belgium's two principal linguistic regions, embodying the country's complex language dynamics. This rail line serves as a bridge between the Dutch-speaking Flanders in the north and the French-speaking Wallonia in the south. The linguistic divide is not merely a cultural distinction, but also impacts daily life and operations, including on this particular railway line, where workers at different stations primarily speak different languages. In Belgium, the linguistic split carries substantial significance, with residents often regarding the other linguistic community almost as a separate nation. This deep-rooted division is also reflected in the dual naming of many entities, including the National Railway Company, known as NMBS, Nationale Maatschappij der Belgische Spoorwegen, in Dutch, and SNCB, Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer Belges, in French. When the signal box worker from Wavre in Wallonia attempted to communicate with his colleague in Leuven, Flanders, the interaction was hindered by their differing native languages. This lack of a common operational language among railway workers in Belgium starkly contrasts with practices in multilingual countries like Switzerland. In Switzerland, despite having 4 national languages, railway workers are typically required to be proficient in at least 2, facilitating communication across linguistic boundaries. Additionally, the Swiss population generally shows greater acceptance towards different languages, unlike the more segregated linguistic attitudes in Belgium. Belgium's absence of a mandatory bilingual requirement for railway workers means there isn't a standardized operational language across the rail network, complicating communications during emergencies and potentially contributing to tragic outcomes such as the one witnessed in Pécrot. Another critical factor in the tragic sequence of events was the failure of the train's onboard radio system, which proved inadequate for emergency communication between the signal box workers and the trains involved. This failure was attributed to the challenging topography of the area, where the rail line snakes through hilly and densely wooded landscapes. These natural features significantly impaired radio signal reception at various points along the line, disrupting the vital communication link. Under normal circumstances, cell phones could have served as an effective backup communication tool, especially since cell phone reception in the area was reportedly less inconsistent than that of the onboard radios. However, neither of the train drivers had a cell phone with them at the time of the accident. Consequently, this left a significant gap in safety measures. With the primary system, signal lights, already compromised, and the secondary system, radio communication, ineffective, there was no fallback to prevent the unfolding disaster. The absence of both primary and secondary safety communications ultimately allowed the catastrophic collision to occur, highlighting a profound vulnerability in the rail system's safety protocols. In the aftermath of the tragic accident, the Belgian National Railway Company, NMBS SNCB, faced legal proceedings. By September 2004, a judge had reached a verdict, attributing the root cause of the disaster to human error on the part of the northbound train's driver. However, the court also recognized that the railway had failed to provide adequate safeguards that could have prevented this human error from escalating into a catastrophic event. Consequently, while the driver was posthumously absolved of criminal responsibility, the NMBS-SNCB was held accountable and fined €100,000. This amount was earmarked for investments to enhance operational safety across the network. In response to this ruling and the identified communication failures during the incident, the NMBS-SNCB took corrective measures to bolster safety. One significant change was the provision of on-duty cell phones to all train drivers, ensuring that they could be reached directly in emergencies, even if the onboard radio systems failed. Additionally, a few years following the incident, a memorial was erected to honor those affected by the tragedy. Located on an underpass near the crash site, the memorial features 2 granite plaques serving as a solemn reminder of the events and the lives impacted. This gesture also underscores the ongoing commitment to remember the lessons learned and the lives lost in the hope of preventing future accidents.